Okay, this is my Team Associated RC10 B4.1. I just want to go over what kind of equipment I'm using, the setup I have, why I have that setup, because you don't really see that on YouTube, and you probably don't want to sift through hundreds of pages of RC tech forums to see what other people are running. So I figured I'd at least explain what I have, and hopefully that will be helpful to you. So the track that I've been racing on is a hard-packed dirt track, and in the morning they water it down and they sweep it. They have this nice motorized sweeper to make a nice smooth surface. But of course, since they had just watered it down, it's kind of low traction in the morning. As the track dries out later in the day, it gets dusty, and so they sweep it between heats. But generally speaking, throughout the course of the day, it's a low to medium traction track, at least for two-wheel drive buggy. I would consider it a low traction surface. So first thing I messed around with was different tires. Popular choice of tires at many hard pack tracks, this track included, is tires like Proline Suburbs or AKA Rebars or J-Consta's Barcodes, tires like that. I'm not too crazy about those tires, to be honest. I think that the tread depth is too low. So what I run are Proline Whole Shots M3 in the rear. I do run Suburbs at the front, but those are four-wheel drive front tires, not two-wheel drive ones. So, these are, RC10 front rims, two-wheel drive front rims, but these are four-wheel drive front Suburbs, M3 compound. And four-wheel drive tires are a little wider for the front tires than two-wheel drive fronts. And the tires fit perfectly fine on these rims, although there's, you notice there's a little lip here extending over the sides of the rims. So you get a little more tread at the front. And for me, I found this works really well. It helps the car behave a bit more stable. And I did also try running J-Consta's Barcodes two-wheel drive fronts on a separate set of rims. Didn't really like those a whole lot. These worked really well for me. So if there's anything you get out of this video, it'd be something like this. Try this out. Try running four-wheel drive fronts on your two-wheel drive buggy. You can do all kinds of, different treads, whole shots, snipers, calibers. I'd be very interested to see how this works out for other drivers. But that's what I run for tires right now. The suspension is box stock. So the springs, the shock positions, shock collar, shock oil, front and rear, box stock. Haven't changed that one bit. There are a few other minor changes that I have done from the box setup. I do run both spacers at the front here for the rear hub carriers. I did not do that when I last went racing. I had one spacer at the front, one at the rear, which is the stock setup. And at the end of the day, the car was behaving fine. It was actually really good. But I knew that in the future, I wanted to have maybe just a little bit more stability. So I pushed the hub carriers back. So there's that. And also the ball cups for all of the camber links and the toe links. I run RPM ball cups, because when I was building this kit, it may have been the mold that I got in my particular box, or maybe this is more of a systemic problem, but the Associated ball cups, I especially noticed it on the front camber links. They run really tight, actually. There's a lot of bind between the ball cup and the ball stud. And I did try to, loosen that up, but I couldn't really do that successfully. So I just run RPM ball cups. They are thicker and stronger, but they also fit nice and snug, and they don't bind up. They're snug, but they're not super tight, so they work really well. Excuse me. For the motor, I run a Novak Ballistic 6.5 turn. Plenty of power if you're bashing around in the street. It's actually too much power if you're on a racetrack. So I set the throttle endpoint to 70%, because, in all honesty, you're not going to have 200-foot front stretches on a racetrack. So you don't need a 6.5 turn on a two-wheel drive buggy. You could probably get away with an 8.5 or 9.5, something around there. Should be fine. But since I already got this motor, I just pull the endpoint down and it basically accomplishes the same thing. By the way, I do run a stick radio, not a pistol grip radio. Masami Hirosaka, the winningest driver in RC history, ran stick. So that's all I need to say about stick versus pistol. End of story. But in any case, that's what I do for the motor. I also run the diff and the slipper a little on the loose side. A looser diff will give you a little bit more traction on low traction surfaces. And that's because this is not, a differential on an RC car is different from what it is in a real car. In terms of, real modern cars can have what are called active diffs, where you can apply power to the wheel with traction. But a normal or dumb diff is the exact opposite. It applies power to the wheel without traction. So if I lock this wheel down and I apply power to the motor, this wheel is going to spin. So suppose you're going straight and the left wheel hits a high traction patch and the right wheel hits a low traction patch, then the differential will apply a larger portion of that power to the low traction wheel. And that way you don't end up effectively spinning out by applying all your power to the high traction wheel. So that's loosening the ball diff will help you there on corner exit. In addition to the normal impact it has on helping the car corner, it does help you accelerate a little bit on low traction surfaces. Slipper clutch, also really good for corner exit if you loosen it up a bit. The track that I run at has, out of one of the hairpins, a quad jump, which you usually take as a double-double. And then out of another hairpin, it's actually another double-double. So, you want to make sure that you get enough exit speed to clear the first double. And if the slipper is too tight, you'll spin out. You won't be able to get enough speed into the car. So the looser slipper effectively dampens the response of the car to throttle inputs. So it's a little more forgiving when you're accelerating out of a turn. So that's pretty much it for the exterior. Oh, the other thing I want to point out is Proline does manufacture wide front rims for two-wheel drive buggies. And I do want to try that out with these wider four-wheel drive front tires instead of the narrower ones. Maybe I'll get a little bit more side bite because this lip here is just going to start folding over when you corner. So that's also something else to try out. So looking on the inside, I used to run a Novak Havoc Pro speed control, but that went up in a puff of pink smoke. And when that happened, that model was discontinued, so I got a Novak Kinetic now. I don't run a fan on the heatsink. Don't really need it because, again, the throttle endpoint's at 70%. I'm not even using all of the motor, and it's not a high traction surface, so, this doesn't get too hot anyway. Although I do run, I do have a little hole in the body there to get some air to the heatsink. But it runs just fine without the fan. Spectrum SR300 DSM receiver. Everyone and their brother has this. Really good. It's only $50, and it works perfectly fine. And I do have the Spectrum DSM module for my Sanwa Exis. Servo is a high-tech 7940TH. Probably overkill for this chassis because even though it's a high-speed servo, it has tons of torque. But I love high-tech servos. They're phenomenal. And this is a really, really good servo. I really like it. I also run it in one of my other chassis too. MRT transponder, cheaper than the A and B ones, but does the same job. The only sort of custom thing I did here was with the weights. I put half ounce of weight on each outer corner here, in part because where the speed control is, there's not a lot of room to fit the speed control and some weight on the inside here against sort of this wall where the battery rides up against. So I mounted the weight on the outside, and I just repeated that for all four corners. So it keeps the weight low, because if I mounted the weight here, the weight would be too high and the car would roll too much. But it also, makes the car more stable because you're adding about 2 ounces of weight, and the weight's on the outside. So the lateral moment of inertia is higher, which means that the car will be less twitchy when you're steering. It'll respond a little slower. So if you have a very fast servo, for example, or you're still trying to get the car dialed in because you're, maybe you turn too fast, and you even if you turn the steering exponential down, it's still not quite enough. Put the wet on the outside. It may certainly help you. So that's what I run. And in time, I would like to get to some of these other chassis I have. I have a B44 back there, a Hot Bodies VE8, an old Tamiya TA02 heavily modified, an F201, some other stuff up here, an SC10 4x4, and I'll make some videos about those in the future. So thanks for watching.